Welcome back to Breaking the Silence, everyone. This is a podcast where we tackle some of the most important conversations, dissecting the things that we often don't talk about enough. Today, we'll be diving deep into a topic that affects us all, whether we realize it or not. This episode is called Unmasking Toxic Masculinity and Femininity, and trust us, this is one conversation you don't want to miss.
You're right, James. It's easy to think of masculinity and femininity as just these simple, natural traits like a guy's supposed to be tough, a girl's supposed to be nurturing, but the reality is much more complicated than that. It's when society forces these narrow definitions onto us that things start to get harmful. Toxic masculinity isn't just about being manly, and toxic femininity isn't just about being feminine. It's about the pressure to be something you're not, in the ways that hurt not only you, but also the people around you.
That's exactly right. And it's more than just a personal problem. It becomes a social one too. These toxic norms seep into our workplaces, relationships, schools, and media. They create a culture where expressing your true self is considered weak or wrong, especially if you don't fit into these rigid boxes. That's why we're here today, to explore what toxic masculinity and femininity really mean and how we can start unmasking them in our everyday lives.
And to kick things off, let's start with a really important question. How do toxic masculinity and femininity show up in everyday life? When we look around us, how are these toxic norms affecting us, and what does it look like in action?
Yeah, I think that when we think about toxic masculinity, we're picturing a lot of things like dominance and aggression or emotional suppression. A lot of phrases like man up or boys don't cry are a lot of things that I've heard. And these are messages that are still being reinforced every single day in a lot of big and small ways. I've seen it in the sports world, I've seen it in schools, and I've even seen it in workplaces.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. In the media, too. Think about all the action movies we see, where the tough guy, the hero, is always this silent, stoic figure who solves problems with violence or intimidation. The message there is clear. Men are supposed to bottle up their emotions, suppress any feelings of vulnerability, and solve problems through sheer force. That's the hallmark of toxic masculinity. The problem isn't that men can be strong and assertive. It's that the idea of what strength means is so narrowly defined, and any deviation from it is seen as weakness.
And then you look at how this shows up in real life. Men who are sensitive or express vulnerability are often made fun of and ridiculed, and even worse, labeled as soft and feminine. Think about how much that gets internalized. It teaches men that their worth is tied to being tough, controlling, and emotionless, and that's not just unfair, it can be dangerous.
Exactly. And I think that when we talk about toxic femininity, we talk about how women are taught to be passive, pleasing, and self-sacrificing. You can see in how women are often expected to put other needs before their own, even if it's at their own detriment. Women who are often assertive or confident are labeled bossy or even unlikable. The standard is that women should be soft, nurturing, and subservient.
You're right, and I think we can see this in literature too. In Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Purple Hibiscus, for example, the characters Mama and Kimbili represent extremes of toxic femininity, I think. They are both women who are trapped by social expectations, and they're both forced to endure abusive relationships with Papa. They've even convinced themselves that the torture is somehow a sign of love, because at one point in the book, Kimbili says, "But it didn't matter, because I knew that when the tea burned my tongue, it burned Papa's love into me." I think this is symbolic almost for how toxic femininity has pushed them to believe that this harm that Papa is giving them is a form of love. And it's making them feel like because they're women, they're forced to suffer silently to uphold this image of like a well-behaved woman, no matter what the costs are to themselves.
And it's not just about the women. Toxic masculinity isn't just harmful to men because it suppresses their emotions. It's harmful to everyone. Take Eugene Achiki, Mama's husband. He represents toxic masculinity in its most extreme form. Eugene believes that the key to maintaining control in his household is through strict discipline. He uses violence to enforce his version of masculinity. And the worst part is, he believes it's for the family's benefit.
Yeah, I definitely agree that Papa is like a form of toxic masculinity in the book. And I think there's another piece of evidence from the novel that can back up the fact that he's expressing toxic masculinity. Early in the book, after Papa has an outburst and damages his wife's like beloved figurines, the daughter Kimbilla says, "I'm sorry your figurines broke, Mama." And I think this is showing how Eugene's been expressing toxic masculinity by showing that by hiding your emotions is almost a form of strength somehow, which the rest of the family has adopted. And this is clearly an issue because it's causing them to avoid confrontation with Papa, which can just lead to more and more kinds of abuse within the family.
Exactly. So when we talk about toxic masculinity and femininity, we're not just talking about how men and women behave. We're talking about a system of beliefs that impact everyone. And the problem is that these toxic expectations are reinforced constantly by the media, by our schools, and even by our families. We all absorb these messages whether we realize it or not. It's so ingrained in our culture that it feels normal to many of us.
Speaking of things in the media, I think it's important to acknowledge the role that a lot of media plays in reinforcing some toxic gender norms. We can see it everywhere, from movies to commercials and even in TV shows. And this changes everything. A documentary about gender imbalance in Hollywood. One of the key points they make is how male characters are portrayed. They say that the male hero is almost always the character who's solving problems with things like violence and aggression, which is reinforcing the notion that men must be dominant and unyielding. This is the same type of masculinity we see in so many action films. Characters who don't cry and never ask for help. They never show any forms of weakness.
Exactly. And women in the media aren't portrayed even much better. Women are often relegated to being the love interest, the supportive background character, or the object of desire. The documentary mentions that women have been cast primarily as the love interest, the object of desire, or the supportive background character, while men have been the ones in charge. This reinforces the idea that women's value is tied to their relationship with men, not their own personal achievements or ambitions.
And to be quite honest, that's a big issue. When the media tells us these stories over and over again, it becomes easy to believe them, and it creates a cycle where we internalize these gender expectations and then pass them on to the next generation.
Next, we'll be talking about how toxic masculinity and femininity harm men and women. Now that we've broken down how toxic masculinity and femininity show up in everyday life, let's talk about the real harm they cause. This isn't just theoretical. These norms have serious, sometimes deadly, consequences for both men and women.
It's very true, Cheyenne. There are a lot of negative side effects for both men and women. For men, this pressure to fit into a rigid idea of masculinity can lead to a lot of mental health struggles. Men are taught to suppress their emotions a lot and to not seek help, avoid vulnerability. Over time, this can lead to some things like depression, anxiety, and unfortunately, in serious cases, sometimes even suicide. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, in the U.S., men are nearly 4 times more likely to die by suicide than women, with the highest rates in men between the ages of 45 and 64.
That is a staggering statistic, and it's so tied to this idea that men can't show weakness. They feel like they can't talk about their emotions or reach out for any support because that would make them less of a man in the eyes of society. They're taught to bottle it all up, and it just builds and builds until it manifests in many different harmful ways.
And to add on to Aiden, it's not just mental health. Toxic masculinity can affect men's relationships too. If they're taught that emotions are weak, that only aggression or dominance can earn them respect, it ruins their ability to form healthy, balanced relationships. It's about control to them, not connection. They can end up feeling isolated because they're not allowed to show their full range of human emotions.
I fully agree. And then there's the issue of women. Toxic femininity forces women into traditional gender roles that require them to put everyone else's needs ahead of their own. It teaches them that their value lies in nurturing, caring, and sacrificing. But when these expectations are pushed to an extreme, it can lead to burnout and resentment. A study from Harvard University revealed that women are significantly more likely to experience burnout due to work-life balance struggles than men.
Yeah, definitely. I think you said some stuff about the workplace earlier, but I think the workplace is also a place where there are double standards that always hurt women. A woman who is assertive or ambitious is labeled as bossy or difficult, while a man displaying the same behavior is called a strong leader. It creates an environment where women are constantly expected to downplay their ambition and leadership in order to avoid judgment. It's kind of frustrating because the same behavior that's praised in men is almost penalized in women.
I totally agree with you, James. Toxic femininity keeps women in this box of being agreeable, submissive, and accommodating, often at the expense of their own well-being. And because society praises them, when they do so, women sometimes feel pressured to continue playing that role, even if it makes them unhappy or leads to self-neglect.
And all of this, whether we're talking about men or women, is made worse by the cultural and societal pressure that's placed on them. These toxic norms are internalized so deeply that people feel like there's no other way to be. But there is a way. The next question that we can discuss is how we can promote healthy masculinity and femininity.
We've talked about the problems. Now let's explore the solutions. How can we promote healthier, more inclusive forms of masculinity and femininity that allow people to truly be themselves?
Well, I think first and foremost, it would be important to redefine what masculinity and femininity means. Let's take masculinity. Real masculinity isn't really about suppressing emotions or being tough. I think it's more about being strong in character, showing emotional intelligence, and being a good listener. Men need to understand that being vulnerable doesn't make them weak. It makes them a human.
That's right. And for femininity, it should be about empowerment, independence, and self-respect. Being feminine shouldn't mean you have to constantly put others first. Women should feel comfortable about being leaders, making decisions, and setting boundaries without fear of being labeled difficult or even unfeminine.
And to add on to that, we also need to see changes in the way children are raised. From a young age, we need to stop teaching boys that showing emotion is weakness, and we need to stop telling girls that they can't be assertive or take the lead. Parents, teachers, and mentors should encourage both boys and girls to express themselves authentically and without fear of judgment. This way, we create a foundation for healthier gender dynamics as they grow.
I completely agree, but I feel schools play a major role here. The education system needs to challenge traditional gender roles from the get-go. Let's teach boys that it's okay to cry, that it's okay to ask for help, and that leadership doesn't require to be dominant or control others. For girls, let's teach them that ambition isn't a bad word, that standing up for yourself is a sign of strength, not aggression.
Yeah, and I think that media has a big role in that too. I feel like we're starting to see a lot more positive portrayals of masculinity and femininity in movies and TV shows, which is a great thing. Films like Black Panther and Wonder Woman gave a lot of strong, complex, multi-dimensional characters who break the mold of what masculinity and femininity should look like. There's a show also I've watched called Ted Lasso, and there's a male lead who is very often open about his emotions, who shows vulnerability, and is still an amazing leader. And I think that's the kind of masculinity we should be celebrating and looking for.
We do need to encourage this kind of positive representation because it shows how young people that they don't have to be limited by the stereotypes they see in the media. If we want to break free from toxic masculinity and femininity, we need to show them different possibilities, different models of behavior. Another question we can get asked, how media and society can help.
Right, Aiden. And like you mentioned earlier, pop culture is a really powerful tool for social change. We saw how movies like The Hunger Games and Mad Max Fury Road changed traditional gender roles by giving us really strong female leads who were just as complex and capable as their male counterparts. And it's not just about making a woman stronger, it's about making masculinity more nuanced and emotionally open too.
It's about creating more balanced portrayals of both genders. If we keep showing men as these stoic, aggressive, unfeeling figures, we reinforce that toxic image. But if we can show men expressing vulnerability, experiencing emotional depth, and still being strong, that will have a lasting impact. We need to change the narrative.
And that definitely starts with conscious choices and things like stories we tell, whether it's in media or like at work, in our homes. We have to stop reinforcing these harmful stereotypes and instead promote more narratives that are diverse, inclusive, and representative of a full range of human behaviors and experiences.
So what's the takeaway from today's discussion? Breaking the chains of toxic masculinity and femininity isn't about erasing gender differences. It's about recognizing that the ways society has traditionally defined these roles are harmful and limiting. It's about giving people the freedom to be their whole selves, no matter where they fall on the gender spectrum.
And it's about action. We all have a role to play in challenging these norms, whether it's how we raise our children, the content we consume, or the way we speak to each other. We can all make small changes that contribute to a larger cultural shift. This is about breaking down these walls and creating space for everyone to express their true selves.
Absolutely. We have the power to redefine what masculinity and femininity looks like in today's world. Let's start by being kinder to ourselves and to each other. Let's make space for emotional vulnerability, for leadership that's grounded in empathy, and for a world where everyone can be strong in their own unique way.
That's very well said, Cheyenne. And I think that's where we're going to leave it for today. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation and that it's opened your eyes about the impacts of toxic masculinity and femininity. And more importantly, I hope it gave you some ideas for how everybody can contribute to creating some more healthy and inclusive gender norms.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. As always, remember, Breaking the silence starts with having these tough conversations. And the more we talk about it, the more we can unmask and dismantle the harmful expectations placed on us all.
We'll see everyone next time. Take
Peace.
Yeah, bye guys.
care.
Oh, yeah. Oh my god. How much? First try, bro.